everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, and we have a whole bunch of people joining us for the first time today, classes, speakers, and more, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And of course, there are no real classrooms right now, so it's all going live to YouTube. We've got a live class joining us in Newfoundland, which is so exciting. Groups joining in on YouTube, and we so appreciate you continuing to tune in as we highlight the coolest scientists, explorers, and organizations from across the globe. So the reason we're all here today is for our speaker. So we are joined live all the way in the UK, across the pond from where I am in Toronto, by John Kendall. And he is a scuba diving explorer and adventurer. For 25 years, he has been doing expeditions all around the world, training, he trained some of the best divers in the world. So he knows what he's talking about. And today he's going to do a broad overview of some of the coolest things he's got a chance to do over those 2.5 decades. I'm so excited to see this presentation. And without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, John, and take us away.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I get the feeling you've given that spiel before, so yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Not with you, though. Not with you.
Well, not with me. Yeah, this is true. Yeah, and thank you very much for having me along. This is really cool. So let me find the right button. Let's pull the correct screen up, and hopefully you're getting a kind of cool little animation on screen there. Yeah, so as Jesse said, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about some of the adventures that scuba diving has given me over the last few years. I mean, I'm going to talk specifically about stuff in the last 5 to 6 years, but as Jesse said, I've been diving quite a while. So let me move on here. So yeah, I started diving in 1993. I was at school. I was 15 years old when I started diving. I had the opportunity to go off during the Easter holidays and learn how to dive. It's something I've always wanted to do. Even as a small child, I wrote a letter when I was 10 years old to the training agency in the UK asking about how I could go about learning to dive. And unfortunately, they wrote back at that time and said, well, you can't until you're 14. How about joining a snorkeling club and learning how to snorkel? But I'd been snorkeling since I was 2. So I didn't really feel the need to go and join a club that would teach me how to snorkel, particularly not in the UK, where, let's face it, it's cold, it's dark. Now, having spent a lot of time diving in the UK in the last many years, obviously the cold and dark is manageable. But as a 10-year-old who wanted to go and look at fish and kind of find treasure underwater, snorkeling in the UK didn't strike me as something I particularly wanted to do. But then, as I said, when I was about 15, I had the opportunity to learn. I did learn in the UK. I learned in the southwest of the UK in a place called Plymouth. And a lot of people learn to dive there. Really thick wetsuits to keep you warm, all the gear on. And amazingly, I made it through the class. I still had this desire to go underwater, despite all of the issues that were involved in that, particularly with wearing very heavy thermal protection. And since 1993, I basically haven't really stopped diving. When I went to university, I joined a diving club. Before I went to university, I took a year out and went and traveled around Belize and Central America, doing a lot of diving and diving related projects there. Went off to university, became part of the club. At that point, I became an instructor within the university club. And since then, it's basically been what I do. The last 3 months with all the lockdown and everything have been the longest period that I've been out of the water since 1998. Which is definitely feeling a bit itchy now. I'm wanting to get back in and carry on the adventures. So now I teach high-level diving. So I teach cave diving, I teach what we call technical diving, and I teach rebreather diving. So cave diving is fairly obvious. It's diving inside a cave, so diving underground, which in itself is amazing. Technical diving is about going deeper. So it's about going deeper and staying down longer. Most recreational dives or recreational diving is limited to between 100 and 120 feet deep. Within what we do and what we teach, we're teaching and diving down to well below 400 feet. So a long way beyond the what we call the recreational limits. And then rebreathers are a particular piece of equipment that enable us to basically stay down longer. It's a way of recycling the gas that we're breathing. So rather than us taking a breath in from the tank and then breathing it out and it turning into bubbles in the water, the rebreather basically allows me to breathe in, and then I exhale. My exhaled gas goes into basically a plastic bag. It then passes through a chemical that removes the carbon dioxide from the gas. There's a little computer in there that looks at how much oxygen there is, adds a bit more oxygen in, and then that enables me to breathe it back in again. And this is all happening constantly as we're diving. It's a very complicated bit of equipment, so it takes some more training, and this is one of the things that I do. I also 2 years ago got voted in as a fellow of the Explorers Club of New York, which was a really big goal of mine. It's an amazing organization. If you haven't heard about it, then please do look them up. Any astronaut, any explorer is basically a member of this club. It's an amazing history, including people like Buzz Aldrin, first man on the moon, all that kind of stuff. They were all part of the Explorers Club, and still some of them, obviously still are. So I'm also really excited about this evening's possible launch with SpaceX. Let's see if that actually happens with the weather in Florida. But so here we go. Let's look at some pretty pictures whilst we're doing this. So this is cave diving. You can see here a couple of my divers. In fact, the one in the front there is actually my wife. So this was a cave in Mexico. You can kind of see that what we're looking at is an amazing underground geology, underground environment. It's an amazing place to be. In a lot of ways, the caves, and particularly flooded caves, are kind of the last place on Earth that is left to explore. The deep ocean and caves are the places that still need exploring, because anywhere on the surface of the planet we now have satellites. They can fly over the top, they can take high resolution photographs, we can kind of see what's going on. But we don't yet have robots or satellites that can look into these caves. There's one robot out there that's starting to get there, but even then it's not quite there yet, and it's cost many millions of dollars to develop that. So here's again, this is a picture of me, and what I'm riding there is, so what I've got in front of me there is a diver propulsion vehicle. So this is a thing that basically can tow me through the water, enables me to move faster through the water. And on the front of it, you can see basically a piece of drain pipe, some duct tape, a lot of cable ties, a pool float. What you can't really see there is the 12 4K video cameras. And the big kind of white things are video lights. So that's all big LED lights. And the purpose of this system was actually we were testing how to 3D scan and 3D map the cave as we dive through it. So this is one of the kind of really cool and exciting things that we're working on at the moment, is how do we bring back the cave? There's very few people are going to be able to go and dive in these caves. If you're really interested and excited about the concept, then there's a lot of training and process to go through in order to get there. But most people aren't ever going to do that, and most people won't want to do that, but they might want to see what's in the cave anyway. So a big part of what I do and my team do is trying to build documentation of these sites. So in this case, we're trying to build digital models, digital 3D models of the cave, so that you can effectively on your computer or maybe on a virtual reality headset swim through the cave without ever getting wet. So that's one of the things we're working on. A bit of traditional archaeology here. So this is a little bit of a sneak preview of my next talk on the 3rd of June, I think we said, about the Mars wreck. So the Mars wreck in Sweden, this is an amazing site, and I'm not going to let myself talk too much about it, other than to say it's 460 years old, I think. It sank in 1564. So no, 470 years old almost, and in the bottom of the Baltic Sea in Sweden. So it's very well preserved, because there's very little oxygen, and there's no shipworm or anything to eat the wood or to dissolve the metals. So you can see here one of my divers, one of my buddies, measuring a cannon, one of the 122 big bronze cannons that are on this ship. And another picture from the Mars as well. Another one of our divers is my friend Rich, who I think gave a talk to you guys a couple of weeks ago, actually. He is looking at a human thigh bone, a human femur. So this is a bit of remains that we found on that wreck. So one of the really interesting things about the Mars wreck is that she blew up in battle. She sank very quickly with about 700 people on board. And one of the things that we're trying to investigate with the archaeology on that wreck is where's the crew? At the moment, we know that about 700 people went down on her. We have found a grand total of one bone. And that's what you can see on screen there, one thigh bone. So somewhere there's probably, on average, most people have 2 of these. So probably there's another 1,399 of them somewhere, and we haven't yet found them. So that's part of the ongoing exploration on that site. But what I really wanted to talk to you is a bit older than that even. The Mars was 450, 470 years. I can't do the maths in my head whilst I'm talking. So I want to talk to you about a project that I was involved in about 4 or 5 years ago in Italy, off the coast of Italy, off the coast of Sicily, sorry. Looking at slightly older shipwrecks. So these shipwrecks sank in roughly 300 BC. So we're looking at almost 2,500 years old, which is an amazing kind of concept. I was very lucky to be involved in the project, and we had this boat here, Pacific Provider, as our support ship. With a crane on it. You can actually see 2 submarines there. They're on deck, 2 submarines. So these are 1,000-foot rated submarines. We have a diving recompression chamber on the deck there as well, in case of any problems with the diving, and a dive station with all the filling and everything, a bunch of small boats for moving us around. And why were we doing all of this? Well, basically, I'll just flick through those. We were looking to dive into and investigate some shipwrecks, or particularly one shipwreck that had been discovered by the governmental archaeologists in about 2010, but that it was too deep for the Sicilian government archaeologists to dive on. So they limit themselves to around 130-foot maximum depth. The wreck that we were looking in at was right around 400 feet in depth. So really, all they'd done is they'd looked at the sonar picture of the wreck and gone, well, that's too deep. We're never going to go there. We'll just put a mark on it, there's something interesting, one day maybe. And then the project I was involved in turned up with the ship, with the submarines, and technical divers who were capable of diving to that depth. At which point, the government team said, well, here is something we would really like you to go and have a look at. It was really nice as well, because it meant that the archaeologists, they're all divers, but they wouldn't be able to ever dive that site. They could go down in the submarines and see the site whilst we were doing the work on it. So they even had a chance to then go and have a look at their sites. So this is a kind of a cool picture. This is mid-water. This is probably on one of our many, many, many very long decompression stops on the way up from the dive. You can see 2 divers in the distance there, and the submarine just kind of sat there watching us. So we were looking at a wreck off an island called Panarea, and it's one of the Aeolian islands off the north coast of Sicily. And this was the side scan data that we got given by the government. So you can see here, what you can see here, this kind of big blob here and this big blob off to the right-hand side, they're rocks. That's just rocks, and then you've got a kind of sandy, flat seabed. And this is pretty much what you expect to see most of the time when you're side scanning the seabed around this area. But then they saw this. Now, this is not a natural formation. You don't suddenly get flat into something like this. So there was a reason for this to be there. And the reason is that there's a wreck there. I don't know how well this picture comes through, but hopefully pretty good. You can see a kind of big pile of amphora. Okay, the big pile of amphora there, and a diver coming over it. And there we go. There's a much better photo. And that first photo was basically my view when I arrived on the wreck site. So the submarine went down, it made sure we were in the right place, and then we followed down the line that we'd put in and started swimming in the direction of the submarine. We could see the flashing lights and stuff that the submarine has on the top to be able to see where we are, and so the submarines don't crash into each other. So we just swim towards the flashing light from the submarine. And we're at 400 feet deep. It's flat bottom. It's taken us about 7 minutes to get from the surface to that depth. That's how long it takes us to get down there. And I look at the dive computer that I have on my wrist that's giving me all the information, and I know that it's taken me 7 minutes to get there. And I look at my wrist, and it tells me it's going to take me at least 2 hours at this point to get back to the surface, because we have to come up slowly in order to what's called decompress. And that's kind of quite a big thing in your head. And then you look forward and you just see this big mound of amphora. And you realize that you're now one of the first people, and in this particular case, there were 6 of us on the dive team. So the 6 of us were the first people to ever dive on this site. Nobody had ever been there before. So the last humans to have seen any of this stuff were Greek or Romans living 300 years before Christ. And then we're the next people to see them. And you just see this big mound of amphora. And for me, I'm a diver. I'm not an archaeologist. Yeah, for me, it's all about going and exploring and adventuring. The archaeology is a great secondary part. But for me, I'm a diver, and I see all these amphora, and it's mind-blowing. I'm looking, and we're trying to get some measurements, and we're making a 3D model of it. And we come up after this first dive. We spend about 6 hours in the water, 5 to 6 hours in the water. And it's super exciting, and we're telling the archaeologists about it, and all of the divers are just talking about these amphora. There are big ones, there's small ones, and the archaeologists don't seem interested. It's like, what's up with that? Amphora, all of these amphora. And the archaeologists then gave us a small kind of lesson in Mediterranean archaeology, and that is that, quite simply, every single museum in Italy has at least 10,000 amphora. Because the entire of the Mediterranean is covered in these things. It turns out that amphoras were basically like tin cans. So for 3,000 years, if you wanted to ship something on a ship across the Mediterranean, you put it into an amphora and then stacked it in a ship. So as far as they're concerned, they don't care about the amphora. But what they wanted to see were the plates, the bowls, the cups, the things that belong to the crew. Because if we could find the small items, they would be unique to that ship. And because they would belong to the crew, that would probably say where the ship came from. Whereas the amphora simply say, where did the ship last stop and put on cargo? So, every week that ship would be loading and unloading amphora. Whereas the bowls, the plates, the stuff, that kind of stuff, would stay with the ship. So the second dive we did, that's what we were looking for. We were looking for these smaller items. And the archaeologists then gave us basically a shopping list of things that they wanted us to recover from the site. And part of that was building the 3D model so they'd know where they came from. So here's one of the things. We didn't recover this. This was one of the things we were looking at. This is a Roman anchor. It's made of lead. It's about 5 feet long. It's actually only part of the anchor. But what we'd know is that in this kind of time period, they would often mold markings onto the anchors. They would also sometimes have animal bones melted into the surface of the lead as kind of I don't know whether it's an offering or was it part of the religion that they did this. But so we were tasked with trying to have a look and see if there was any markings on this anchor. So we spent a good dive with a steel brush trying to scrape off 2,500 years worth of organic growth off this anchor. We found nothing on the anchor, I will say. We spent a long time trying, but we didn't find anything on that anchor. So we gave up with the anchor. This is a picture from the 3D model, though. So what you've got here is an overhead view now of the entire site. You can see all of the amphora. The estimations that we have is there's about 3,500 of them on this site. But down in this corner here, hopefully you can see my mouse there. You see some kind of circles. Now, there's a tiny little circle just here. That circle is actually about 6 inches diameter. That turned out to be a really, really important thing that we found. And you can see here us unburying it. And this is basically a sacrificial altar. So this would have been mounted on the bows of the ship. This thing would have been upright on the bows of the ship, kind of a base, a pillar, and then a big bowl. And before the ship left the port, it would put a small meat or offering on it and then burn it to send it up to the gods to hope for safe passage. And then when they arrived at the next port, all safe, they'd obviously put another offering on it and burn it to say thank you to the gods for safe passage. Now, in this particular case, obviously, we found the wreck or found the ship 400 feet underwater. The gods obviously did not like whatever it was that they burnt and sent to them. Maybe they were fussy gods that day, and maybe they wanted beef and they burnt lamb or something. Who knows? But yeah, it was a very exciting find because this is the first one that was ever found on a underwater site in this area. So kind of it was a world first to find one of these underwater. They've been found in terrestrial sites, so on land before, but they'd never been found underwater. So we found it, and then we recovered it. Just to give you an idea, in terms of the dive, that's me. that pile of stuff that you can see just there is me. That's me with what's that, 8 cylinders attached to me. So even though we're diving a rebreather, which enables us to recirculate the gas that we're using, we still need a lot of gas for these dives. So that's me. I've got a DPV, a scooter there that pulls me along underwater, and all of those cylinders. And the guys in the submarine are sat there in shorts and a t-shirt with a cup of coffee, quite happily sipping. I know at this point I've got 4 hours, 5 hours before I'm allowed to get back on the boat. And at one point, the submarine kind of gave us a wave and disappeared upwards. I was like, maybe there's a problem with the submarine. And then 15 minutes later, the submarine came back. I was like, we're looking at them. We can't work out what's going on with the divers. We get to the surface and we ask the submarine pilot, so what was that all about? Why did he go up and come back down again? The answer was they'd run out of coffee. So they'd gone up to get coffee and come back down, whilst we're there in the water, 5 hours of decompression that we've still got to do to get out. So that was kind of fun. I think the guys in the submarine maybe got the better job there, but we get to touch the stuff in situ. They just get to look at it. So there we go again, a bit more of the recovery. So what did we pull up? Well, we recovered a number of the amphoras, and the archaeological team basically dredged them out to try and work out what was in them. A lot of them were a kind of fish paste, and this fish paste was one of the major trading things in the Mediterranean at this time. So every island had its own different type of fish paste, and they were all kind of it was a delicacy that was moved around and made a lot of money. Olive oil and wine were the other things that were found. So small amphoras, larger amphoras, some large bowls. And then, as I said, we found this thing, the sacrificial altar. The amazing thing is we lifted this first part, this left-hand photo, we lifted that on one dive. And it was kind of interesting. It looked to me like a bowl with the bottom broken off, but it was a bit too heavy duty. So that the archaeological team said, look, there's something more to go with this. Go and find it. And we did. We found it on the next dive and we lifted it up. And the amazing thing was we then slotted it back together. You can actually see that in the second picture there of lining up the edges where it's cracked, and then the thing just dropped in, and then it was solid. It was solid and stable. And that just shows that's the first time those two pieces have been back together since 300 BC, so 2,400 and something years. And here we can see it sat on the deck of the ship, upright. This is now on a museum tour around the world, this particular artifact, because it was so important that it was an amazing thing. It was one of a kind. It's done more air miles than I have now, because it's going round and around the world in this amazing Sicilian archaeological museum tour. Cool. I don't know how we're doing on time. How are we doing, Jesse? Carry on.
We can do a few more minutes, 5 more minutes. Go for it.
Yep. Cool. So we also were doing on the next year. We went back and we're doing some more stuff in a place called Capistello Bay. And the amazing thing about Capistello Bay is that there's a shipwreck there that was researched heavily in the 1970s. So an archaeological team in the 1970s were working with a submarine, with hard hat divers, so with the umbilicals coming down and the air being pumped from the surface coming down. And they did a lot of work on this site in the 1970s. And it was always assumed that basically everything that could be done had been done. But it was literally just around the corner from our base on the island. So we thought, well, let's go and have a look. And we also sent the submarines there in 2014. That we sent our submarines in, and they spotted this little pillar. So 2015, we went back to have a look at the pillar, and we went again. This is a photo of me on the left-hand side. You can see my camera rig. That's this great big thing on here on top of my propulsion vehicle. Me with the rebreather. And this little pillar. It was very odd. We didn't know what it was doing there, because it was about 410, 420 feet deep. And it was literally at the edge of a drop-off. So the walls just dropped off to nothing. The submarines maxed out going down to 300 meters, so 1,000 feet, because that was their maximum depth, and the bottom was still not seeable. I think the bottom's around 4,000 feet deep at that point, just off this edge. But this thing had been sat there for 2,000 years. There had been so much volcanic activity in the area that an island had actually popped out of the sea less than 10 miles away 500 years after this sank. So it's been sat there even through volcanic eruptions and islands appearing out of the seabed. So we made a digital 3D model of it. We took some archaeological photos like this. We made some pretty photos. made a digital 3D model of it, which if this hopefully will play, you can see what that means. So this is in situ. We go down, we take a lot of photos, and we make this digital model. And it's the amazing thing is it means that the archaeologists can now look at this from the safety of their office rather than having to go down and either recover it or divers to do any of the measurements and things. So this was all scaled. They could take measurements from it. We gave them this model, and then the archaeological team said, actually, you know what? We want it. We want you to go and recover. So we actually did go and recover that out of the seabed. Again, this is actually the 3D model that we made of the other wreck that I was talking about, the one with the first altarpiece in. So you can kind of get an idea of what it's like to dive to 400 feet in the Mediterranean there with all of those amphora. I'd like to just mention quickly, these guys are Soprintendenza del Mare, and please apologize my breaking of the Italian language. I don't speak Italian, but that roughly translates as the Superintendent of the Sea, which is the governmental archaeology department. But for me, the Superintendent of the Sea is the job that I want to have one day. I feel that you need to be standing on a pier with like a trident and a net, and like a gold helmet. That's for me the Superintendent of the Sea, the kind of the aquatic gods there. But all of these dives we did under license from them, so they've been a big supporter of us, and we've been a good symbiotic relationship with them over many years. So with the archaeology and the divers. Cool. There we go. That's kind of the end of my little presentation there. Let me find which screen has the button gone on. There it has. Right, there we go. Well,
John, that was awesome. Thank you so much for such a neat tour. And what fantastic, like, it's just, you're who I want to be when I grow up. What a lot of fun. For everyone on YouTube, and we've got people joining from Ontario, across the US and more, just let me know where you're joining from, share questions, and I'll take as many as I can in the chat bar. And for Miss Hiscock's class joining us in Paradise, Newfoundland, all the students, yes, you guys can ask questions here. Just let me know in the chat bar. Miss Hiscock, I'll come to you first and see if you have a question on behalf of your class, or just that it might be of personal interest to kick us off. So come on up and let's demute your mic. It's not letting me demute you, but when it does, there you go.
Perfect. Yes, that was awesome. It was so cool seeing all the pictures.
Thanks.
So we have the Titanic that's pretty close to us off of Newfoundland.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Have you done anything similar to diving down for the Titanic, or have you worked on the Titanic?
Unfortunately, I've not worked on the Titanic. The Titanic is, I'm going to get my numbers wrong, but about 3.5 miles deep. So divers can't ever go there. Unfortunately, I would love to. It would be mind-blowing to be able to do it, but it is just too deep for the human physiology to be able to survive. However, obviously, there are submarine dives that are occasionally done. I think there's now 3 submarines on the planet who are capable of diving to the depth that the Titanic's at. But the Titanic has always been, as many people, it's been an amazing story and history in my head as well. It's very interesting that there's a project being put together at the moment to look at trying to retrieve the radio out of the Titanic. There's been a lot of talk about it because it was the first distress signal from sea. It's like the first major distress signal from sea, and the Marconi radio is like unique. But it's one of its sister ships is the Britannic, and now the Britannic sank in Greece in World War One. It hit a mine and sank, and that's actually in, let's say, diveable depths. It's only 400 feet deep. I've not yet had a chance to dive it, but it's one again on one. It is one of my bucket list dives. I have dived quite a lot of other wrecks in that kind of range and of that kind of size, but the Titanic and the Britannic and their story is just so unique that I give if tomorrow I got a phone call going, hey John, there's a space in the sub, then I don't care about quarantine and lockdown. I'd be working out how to get there, to get on that sub to go to the Titanic. I think.
I think if anyone in their life can find something or someone they love as much as you love diving, that you're set. Like, that's all you need. I want to follow up quickly, actually, because you mentioned the limits of human physiology when it comes to diving. So what is that limit? Like, where have people been able to go to personally?
Okay, so the limits at the moment. So for the limit for kind of, let's say, a self-swimming diver is it's right around 1,000 feet. It's about 1,020 feet is where let's say the world record for that is. The problem with that is that there is one guy who's managed to do that. There's another guy there's like two people who have successfully dived to 1,000 feet in a free swimming environment. Unfortunately, there's probably 50 or 60 people who have died trying to do that. So that they really are hitting the level, the limits of physics and physiology. Now, within the commercial diving realm, there were test dives done by an organization called COMEX, who are kind of like one of the big commercial diving operations in the 1970s, 1980s. And I believe they've gone to about 700 meters, which is just over, what's that, 2,100, 2,200 feet. But that's in a bell environment. So they've got a bell and then an umbilical to the diver. They're in a hard hat. And so, the diver goes down, they can go out of the bell. They're now underwater, but they're basically completely dry inside their own system. Then they get back into the bell and then are winched up slowly and decompressed on a chamber on the boat, rather than having to do all the decompression element in the water. It's still, I mean, again, there was a lot of physiological things that were discovered when they did those kind of dives that weren't known about beforehand. But it all comes down to pressure, that too much pressure makes the body, the body has evolved to live on the surface, not,
Right.
thousands of feet underwater. So,
yeah. You mentioned a bell, and I just want to harp for kids at home. It's just the coolest experiment. Get a glass like this, put a piece of paper and tape it inside, flip the glass upside down in a perfectly flat body of water, and just ever so slowly just poof, and lower it, and the paper won't get wet. It'll keep the air trapped inside the glass, and the paper will stay dry. So that's just a fun thing you can do at home, sort of a personal exploration of the diving dolphins. Jack in Miss Hiscock's class has a question. So Jack, I'm going to demute your mic, man, if you have a question for us, or you might need to demute your own. Again, it's not letting me demute today. But Jack, if you have a question, come on. And if not yet, we can come back in a second.
Oh, there we go.
Jack, hey, go for it, man.
Have you been to the Great Barrier Reef?
Yeah.
have I been to the Great Barrier Reef? I've not yet been to the Great Barrier Reef, but I have plans for next year, next Easter. A very good friend of mine is getting married, and his wife-to-be is Australian, so they're getting married in Australia. So the plan is we're going to go to Australia for the wedding, and whilst we're there, we're going to go diving on the Great Barrier Reef. A little bit closer to you guys, though, is the second largest reef in the world, which is off the coast of Belize. Yeah. So the second largest barrier reef in the entire world is off Belize, which is obviously in the Caribbean. And I did do a lot of diving there, so I've done a whole lot of projects and stuff on the second barrier reef, let's say, off the coast of Belize. Yeah, out in Australia, I'm waiting for the day. I'm waiting for it.
Well, we'll have to do a follow-up talk after that. I hope the wedding party is going with you, like in the gowns. That would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's going to happen, but yeah,
keep us posted.
We'll see. Yeah.
A quick follow-up on the Belize thing. How many countries have you dove in, John? In your
Oh wow, lots. So no, we're probably talking at least 30. Yeah, I've dived almost every European country. I've dived in various places on the US. I've dived in a few places around Canada. A lot of the Caribbean I've dived in Brazil, Egypt. Yeah, so there's a lot of countries I still want to dive in. Don't get me wrong. There's more places than I have years left, I suspect. Yeah, but I would have said that at the age 10 as well. There's so much underwater. There's 70% of the world's surface is covered in water, and we've explored the tiniest fraction of a percent of it. So
fantastic! I love the passion. Ms. Hiscock, come on back in if you have a question on behalf of Sarah. We'd love to hear it. Go for it.
Yes, so Sarah has a question for you. I know, or we know, that you've wanted to be a diver since you were very, very young. But Sarah's wondering, if you didn't become a diver, what do you think you would be doing right now?
So that's a good question, and actually fairly well. Right now, I don't know. I think I'd still be sat on my chair in my shed because obviously of all the problems. But I didn't start off as a working diver, and even now, I teach diving, but it's the project work isn't always paid for. A lot of the time we are volunteering for that. But I again, as a small child as well, I was very enthusiastic about the theatre. So I actually ended up, and for a lot of years, worked as a lighting engineer for theatrical productions and for concerts and for stuff like that. So, if I didn't have the diving, I suspect I'd still be doing exactly that. You'd find me climbing up in the roof of an arena, hanging lights, or swearing at somebody who'd hung the lights wrong or something.
We can do a presentation on that at some point. That's fun. Honestly, like, it's amazing how many people that are doing stuff that they love, sort of occasionally on a volunteer basis, where they have a background in theater. Theater seems to be like a unifying force for a lot of really, really passionate, very creative people.
One of the things I always found about the theater is you end up being very inventive, because one of the things about theater is there's never any money. Even on the massive budget, Broadway shows, there's still no money. So you've got to be inventive, and you have to come up with ways that will work. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to work. And I find that with exploration, it's exactly the same. You need to be able to think on your feet. You need to be able to come up with solutions there and then really quickly that will do the job. It might not be the best way of doing it. You could spend a week coming up with a much better way of doing it, but then you're a week too late. You just need something now that will do the job. So I think that mindset and exploration, they do very much come together.
I'm so glad you followed up with that. That's exactly where I was hoping to go with that. Charlie in Ottawa, who has joined us for so many programs. Charlie just doesn't do anything else at home other than join our programs, which is great.
Awesome.
Charlie wants to know, what is the weirdest thing you've seen when you've been diving? And I know that might be hard.
So okay, here's my probably least expected thing. In its environment, probably not very weird, but I was doing a cave dive in the south of France, and we were actually surveying a cave. So it was a cave that had been explored, but there weren't very good maps. And what we were trying to do is build much better maps. And we dived in. We're probably, I'm running in meters here. So we were about 1,400 meters in. So that's linear distance, 1,400 meters in. So I guess that's just around a mile. Just under a mile in. Yeah. So we've gone in about a mile. We are 260 feet deep. So we're 260 feet down. We're a mile in, and we're surveying this bit of cave. And it's relatively small. It's probably about 8 feet by maybe 10 feet, the size of the cave that we're going through. And we're there with bits of string and compasses and underwater notepads for writing down the data. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, came this pike. And this pike must have been almost like 2.5 feet long. And we're in an underwater cave. It is black. There is no light whatsoever. The only light is the light that we are carrying as the divers. So how this pike got that far in, I have no idea. But it was this big. It literally came straight at us, and it was like, whoa. And so we kind of went around the pike and carried on doing the survey. And we carried on surveying, and then we turned around, and as we're coming back, literally, this pike is just asleep on a rock on the bottom of this cave. And it's obviously, it had its spot, and it was getting upset because somebody else was coming, I don't know, it didn't want people in its spot. But as I said, it's so far away from the daylight for a fish to be that big in that environment. I just do not know how it survives or how it got there or anything else. So that was the least expected thing that I'd ever seen underwater. Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a couple more questions because amazingly, we're getting near the end of the presentation here. So one thing I have to ask, what ship are you on? What is this background? Is it a random generic ship, one that you've been on?
Yeah. I have no idea. Actually, this was literally grabbed off Google.
That's funny.
And I've used this background for a few presentations for other people as well. And I've spent days trying to find what ship this is, just so that I have an answer to that question. And I haven't been able to find, there's one picture of this ship on Google and nothing else. There's no information about it.
You're like an underwater detective. We believe in you, okay? So for the Mars program, June 3rd, I'm excited to find out the name of the ship. That's funny.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll go back to Jack. Jack has another question, man. Come on in and just demute your mic, and we'll take another one from you before we wrap up with our typical wrap-ups. Jack, if you're around. There you go.
Have you ever found a marine dinosaur fossil?
Yeah, any fossils of dinosaurs, creatures in the water?
So I have, personally, I've not, but I do know a lot of people, particularly in the US, who are finding megalodon teeths teeth. So these big megalodon teeth, which they're found in a lot of the rivers as well. So there we go. Yeah, perfect. And
I just want to bring that up.
yeah, there we go. Exactly. Yeah. So these big teeth from these super sharks that lived millions of years ago. Yeah, I'd love to find out. I've done all sorts of searching dives and rivers. I did a load of stuff in the St. Lawrence actually, and we didn't find any fossils, but we found more glass bottles than I ever thought was possible. And it's like a carpet of glass bottles actually down there, and it's literally boaters, guys going out on their leisure boats over hundreds of years and lobbing them overboard. I found a soda bottle from 1860.
And you sold it on eBay for $10,000.
No, actually, I have it on my bookcase, but that's only because I looked on eBay and found it was worth about $3. But
well, we hope when you're in Australia you get a chance to find some megalodon fossils, because I know they're there. And ancient super sharks is just a great line in and of itself. So good luck.
Yeah,
John, this has been awesome. Before we wrap up, is there any advice you give to kids who are super keen? They've watched this presentation, they've seen like all the amazing work you get to do. How can we inspire them to learn more about what you do, get involved, and go diving themselves?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the things, I haven't really mentioned it, the organization that I'm involved in is called Global Underwater Explorers, GUE. We have the best web page in the world. Well, the best web address in the world. It is GUE.com. So please do go and have a look at that. We teach diving, we explore. We're also heavily into conservation of the aquatic world. So there's loads of stuff there. But the really big thing, if you're really keen about the aquatic world at all, being underwater, anything like that, number one, make sure you can swim properly. Get really good at swimming, because whilst you've got all the gear on, you're still a swimmer. Then, go out and learn to dive. You can learn to dive anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter whether you're in warm climates, cold climates. There are age limits depending on where in the world you are and what you're doing, but get involved in it and go and do it if you can. And then, don't get sucked in by the process of learning to dive, but remember that you're learning to go and see stuff, and make sure that you're passionate about that. You can then learn about animals, you can learn about wildlife, you can learn about different kinds of plant life underwater, you can learn about the history, the archaeology, and whether that's modern in terms of more modern shipwrecks or ancient history. Learn as much of that as you can, and then use the diving as the tool to enable you to go there, which is basically what I try to do.
Outstanding. And remember, guys, like 71% of the world is water. So when you learn to dive, not only do you have the black magic ability of breathing underwater, but you get to explore a much larger percentage of the planet than you do just on land. So we encourage you to do that. 10 years old in Ontario anyway, and I think Canada-wide, you can start on the path to being a diver. And in the meantime, hone swimming, get snorkel, learn how to snorkel, and that'll really open up a whole new world for you. John, this has been amazing. What we do at the end of every one of our broadcasts is I'm going to demute the microphones if I can of every one of our students in Miss Hiscock's class. So Miss Hiscock's group joining us in Newfoundland, if you guys could demute your mics and join me in saying a huge thank you to John for joining us today. It wants to work. It really does. There we go. Thank you so much, John. There we go. There we go, Miss Hiscock's goose. Guys, you're all demuted. Go for it.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So much, guys. To everyone on YouTube as well, we really appreciate you being here. We look forward to having you back soon. And as I said, John's doing another presentation with us on a really cool shipwreck on June 3rd, 10 a.m. Eastern time. So come check that out. John, thanks so much again.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.